Chapter 22 of Deliver Me from Eva by Paul Bailey. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Ben Tucker. Chapter 22. I wanted Eva to realize it was Mark Allard who followed. I wanted her to hear me, to see me, to know that I had seen, and having seen, could hate enough to spill her blood. I wanted her to turn, to face me, to grant me recognition, or to join her invisible dead by the quick, sure route of my flaming gun. On the flagstoned terrace I called her name. She neither paused nor listened. I raised my gun to fire. I lowered it at a thought, and followed her into the house. And I testify I saw her, and heard her talk and nod to the ghost who walked beside her. It was I who was the invisible wraith as I stalked the unholy pair across the music room, across her study, and to her very chamber door. I testify that here in the sacredness of my own marital domain, I saw my wife bid her formless consort good night. And if it were hands she gripped, and lips she kissed, only my imagination could conjure the ghostly man to whom she leaned, and toward whom she so queerly was lavishing herself, and with such obvious pleasure. I could not tell whether my beloved was endeavoring to pass the chamber door, to invade her more intimate circle, but after her lingering caress of what to me was thin air, I did not hesitate to follow. And too, I must testify that I shoved the gun to my pocket, stood within her chamber, and watched in rapt silence while she prepared herself for bed. "Margot," she called. I chuckled fiendishly. Margot was crazy too. Margot was shutting in the smells at the cradle of light. But Eva called no more, and after a perplexed wave of her beautiful head, she disrobed to nakedness. Following a languorous stretch and yawn or two, she lazily donned the satin gown which lay across her bed, and like rime before the sun, my urge to kill dissolved, and I feasted eyes on the voluptuous scene enacted before me. I waited until she had nestled into bed before I stepped directly to her presence. With all the naivete and charm of girlhood, she was snuggling to the deeper comforts of her pillow. "Eva," I called, touching my hand to her warm forehead. "Eva, it's Mark." And I testify that she shuddered and cringed, as though my hands were the cold and slimy creep of some loathsome reptile. "Eva," I implored, shaking her gently. "Eva!" She whimpered sleepily. She drew away from my touch. And what a moment before had been a sensual urge to share her bed, suddenly and devastatingly translated itself into the vilest sort of rebellion. Frustration, jealousy, the freakish premise of all I had been called upon to endure. These were the final weights to that unendurable load which broke my sanity. "You evil witch!" I screamed. "You unspeakable vulture! You've ruined me, destroyed me, and as God lives, I'll destroy you!" In hellish insult, she nestled closer to her bed, and rhythmically breathed in sleep. I drew the gun. With an aim that could not fail, I held it inches from her head. I looked at the tumbled beauty of her hair, remembered a dozen intimate moments, and could not bring myself to squeeze the trigger. Next moment I was screeching like an imbecile, as frothingly mad as Enza. I don't know how many times I ran through Eva's chamber, how many chairs I crawled over, how long or how often I lay writhing like a crushed lizard in the deep pile of the thalamus rugs. I do know that when the madness subsided, I found myself in my own study, physically exhausted. I knew it was the finish. I knew I was broken before a power beyond my abilities to cope with or subdue. I had only one thought, and now it had become an obsession: to deliver myself from Eva, to shed the trappings of the Craner horror. Weakly, shakingly, I crawled to my study chair. Like a famished dog before a beefsteak, I grabbed at the phone. The miracle of the lines working impressed me none. A second later, I was dialing Brinkley's number. And then Brinkley's sleepy voice was sounding in my ear. Wary and world-wise as were its intonations, they came like a spring freshet to my parched and burning soul. "In God's name, Brink," I implored. "Save me. Save me, please." His voice suddenly came to life. "Where in hell are you? We've been looking—" "Follow the Arroyo Seco north, the Craner place. But, man, nobody would know. Immense state. Stone Gateway. Bring a squad. It's murder. And a doctor. We're all crazy." "But the house number, Mark?" "I don't know. Follow the Canyon Boulevard to Gates. But get—" In the same instant with a shot, my left arm was seared as though with a hot iron. I dropped the telephone. I sprang to my feet, and there was Margot. She still wore her heavy coat. In her left hand she carried a lighted kerosene lantern. In her right hand was the gun which had wounded me. "I'm sorry, Mark," she said, "but I heard you." Calmly she laid the lantern on my study table and dropped the telephone, and Brinkley's protesting voice back to the hook. I grabbed instinctively for the revolver in my pocket. "Don't do it," she said, poking her own gun muzzle at my ribs. A moment later she had snatched my pistol away and had securely pocketed it in her big coat. Stupidly eyeing her, I sat down. "They're coming," I said, pointing to the telephone. "Then it's the end." "Thank God," I fervently sighed. "How badly are you hurt?" "I'm winged all right," I said dismally. "Take off your coat, Mark," she ordered. Clumsily and painfully I removed the rumpled coat of what earlier had been a neatly pressed blue worsted suit. I offered no protest as one-handedly she ripped away my left shirt sleeve. "Just nicked the flesh," she said with obvious relief. "You'll not run away while I get dressings?" "I don't have to run away now," I declared. "Brinkley will come." "Yes," Margot sighed, walking swiftly to the door. "Brinkley will come." In perverse fascination, I watched the blood trickle down my bared left arm and out across the tabletop. To fight Margot now would be a most senseless and useless waste of effort. I was weary beyond any weariness I'd ever known. I'd had my say to Brinkley. Knowing I was in trouble, he assuredly would find a way. Now all I had to do was float with the tide. And while I floated, I gazed curiously at Margot's kerosene lantern. She soon returned with a nickeled medical kit. She'd discarded her coat, but I could see that her apron pockets sagged with the weight of at least one of the guns. Precisely, methodically, she opened the kit and went to work. "Why did you do it?" she asked, adroitly sponging the wound with an antiseptic which stung my raw and bleeding flesh. "I could stand it no longer," I groaned. "We're all crazy, Margot. We must get out." "But if only you'd waited, all would have been well with us. Ava and you would have—" "Ava and her accursed ghosts!" I shrieked. Margot smeared the bullet hole with medicated salve and dropped a square of gauze upon it. "Tonight Ava's cycle would have ended, but now every hope and prospect is shattered." With skillful hands, she wrapped my upper arm with a roller bandage and neatly taped it in place. "I was striving toward our liberation and our new life," she sighed. I nodded at the lantern. "Hunting for death smells with that, I suppose." "Listen, Mark," she said, eyeing me in soberness. "This is a moment of crisis for both of us. As to you and Ava, what happens now must happen. You've chosen your own course. But for me, that course you chose can mean only one thing: expulsion and death." "Now, Margot," I protested, "it's not as bad as that. Have you any idea what I was doing at the Cradle of Light?" "Plugging in the smells," I hellishly chuckled. "That's right, but perhaps not in the queer manner you've imagined. My trip to the cellar on the doctor's tram was not only for the purpose of plugging the cellar's windows, but with the deliberate intent of flooding that evil house with gas. I closed off the pilot light in the big incinerator. I opened wide its door and turned on its full flow, to enter by way of the elevator cable shafts, the atelier, and all the lost and hopeless rooms above. My tram ride back to Thalamus was but a moment. My closing of windows and preparation for the great finale has taken more time. But all is in readiness. The incriminating evidence would have been wiped away in a single stroke. You would have grown mighty at Thalamus, and you could have faced the world in the glory of your new calling and the psychic strength we'd have given you. But instead you chose another way. The Kramer therapy is doomed. I am doomed. I drew a cigarette, languidly put it to my lips, and one-handedly struck a match from my table box. Though the numbness of my arm was changing to an annoying ache, I pondered Margot's disclosure with interest. In one point I'd mistaken craftiness for insanity. Or maybe it was insanity, I could not tell. At any rate, her absurd questions at the Cradle of Light no longer seemed absurd. And that incident, I realized when she had snatched from me both match and cigarette, had been only sensible assurance against a premature explosion. "How had you planned to ignite her fireworks?" I asked. "With the lantern?" She nodded. "It's merely necessary to hang the lantern on the doctor's tram, press the lever, and let the carriage take the open flame down the tunnel." I gaped in utter surprise at the woman. Her plan to wipe clean the Craner slate, to fumigate the Cradle of Light of its darksome aura and past crimes, was bold, clever, and almost diabolical. It generated new ideas in me, and quite suddenly I regretted my impulsive telephone call to Brinkley. Soon, very soon, I must confess before the world, not only my part in some strange and inexplicable affairs, but must incriminate Margot and possibly Ava. As for the great plan and my succession to the kingship, I blasted it as certainly as Margot would have blasted the Cradle of Light. "I'm sorry, Margot," I apologized. "I can see now that I was hasty, but Ava, I tell you, Ava's gone queer." "Can't you believe me when I tell you she's almost out of her cycle? That any moment now she'll come to you, as loving, as true, and as normal as any wife could be. But your telephoning has done irreparable damage. You'll be questioned, pilloried, and forced to explain these things to a world who never will and never can understand. However, that's the course you've chosen, Mark. You and Ava must face it alone. I cannot share the future with you, because my life and my acts form no pattern which can be logically or legally explained." I watched Margot sink dejectedly into one of the study's deep chairs, and as the minutes passed I thought back on the whole mad affair. Definitely Margot was responsible for 2 of the slayings. As for myself, I had deliberately plotted the death of no one, though indirectly an accomplice in Craner's burning, by rendering him so lethally impotent that Margot could administer the coup de grace. Again, there were all the other crimes and queer affairs we somehow must explain. I looked at Margot and shook my hairless head in bewilderment. "What a hell of a mess," I groaned. "What a stinking hell of a mess." "I'm terribly sorry I shot you," Margot said, half smiling. "Think nothing of it," was my airy reply. "That's trivial to the mess I've gotten us into." While the lantern neglected on the table between us burned on and smelled stronger, we parboiled our minds in thought. "When did you connect the telephones?" I said, rousing suddenly. "Why, tonight. I considered it wisdom to have the line open so we might register proper concern to the authorities when the Cradle of Light suddenly blasted itself into oblivion." "By God, let's finish the job," I shouted, rising. "It's our only hope." "But my plans must change now," Margot dismally replied. "For your sake, for Ava's sake, We both were silenced and cocked ears to the sound. It came, the clear, sweet ripple of a piano, and the firm, majestic notes told us instantly that it was Ava who played. "I told you," Margot said excitedly. "Her cycle, it's ended." "She'll know me?" I cried. "She's yours, Mark. She's yours to take, to cherish." In quick strides I was at the keyboard of my Steinway. Exultantly, wildly, I struck a chord. Without hesitation, it was answered from the music room. and for 5 ecstatic minutes I made happy love to my bride by way of the universal voice of music, and received in soul-stirring abundance the cadent and sensual answers of her genius. She was mine again, and I knew it. The final sealing proof was her flirtatious, girlish rendition to me of chopsticks. I arose to seek my bride, and in one grim instant I saw that Margot and her lantern were gone. I made one step toward the music room in the joy that awaited me there, and then I hesitated and swung on my heel. The voice of conscience told me what had happened. Without further indecision, I yanked the bookshelf outward from the wall. Ducking my head to avoid the low door, I hurtled down the basement incline. When I reached the tunnel's entrance, Margot already had folded herself into the doctor's tram. She tossed me the gun. It clattered at my feet. "Goodbye, Mark," she called, and gaily waved the lantern. "No, no!" I cried, diving for her. "No, please, Margot!" "It's best this way," she said. Her hand beat mine to the starting lever. A whir of motors, and Margot was gone. Like the frantic hope within me, the lantern's flame quickly receded to a lighted pinpoint, and then vanished from the black hole before me. I frantically searched for a switch, but even as I searched, there came that sickening puff of air through the tunnel. The earth shook. The dull roar sounded like distant thunder. The quiet that followed was appalling. I glanced at the hole. I glanced at the gun on the floor. My bowels grew sick within me. I did not hurry as I walked up the incline. I was in no particular haste as I crossed my study. It did not surprise me that Eva had gone from the music room. I found her on the terrace, dressed again in white. She was gazing in fright and wonder at the fiery sheaf of light from the flame-gutted house of her father. But she knew and recognized me, and even fear and sorrow moved aside for that. "Mark!" she cried, pointing at the red and yellow inferno above the trees. "Mark, beloved, look!" I forgot my naked bandaged arm as exultantly I folded her to me. I heard the cars along the canyon roadway, and vaguely I wondered what to do, what to say. Brinkley, I knew, would soon arrive. In a moment there would be sirens, and like a devouring scourge the outer world would move in. I gazed back at Thalamus, and shame rose in me for the troubles I was bringing to it. But my bride was in my arms, and hope soared afresh, as passionately I bent to kiss her. "God be thanked I'm a lawyer," came my fervent murmur. End of chapter 22. End of Deliver Me from Eva by Paul Bailey.